Hello everyone, and welcome to the first video in my Blender 3D tutorial series. We're going to start off slow by looking at some of Blender's user settings. I'm not going to go over everything, but there are a couple of things I wanted to talk about here. So, to open the user settings, you go to Edit, and click Preferences, and that should open up the settings menu. The first tab I want to talk about is the Themes tab. This allows you to change the way Blender looks. Now, some of you may have noticed my color scheme is a bit different than the default, which is called Blender Dark. It looks like this. That's because I have a different theme activated called Maya, which looks like this. One important thing to note is that creating your own theme from scratch can get fairly complicated. That's what all these settings are down here. And I'm not really going to go into that. I personally recommend just sticking to the presets at least until you're a little more familiar with how Blender works. But that's really up to you. The next tab I want to go over is the Add-ons tab. And this is kind of like plugins for Photoshop. So by default, Blender disables a lot of its features. And honestly, I'm kind of glad it does, because if it didn't, it'd probably be pretty overwhelming. The program itself is already complex enough with all the different keybinds and everything, and so adding in 10,000 features that you probably are never going to use probably wouldn't be a good idea. We aren't going to actually do anything with this right now. I mainly just want you to keep in mind where this is, because we'll be using this to install various things throughout our lessons. The next tab I want to go over is the Input tab, and I don't really ever do anything under here. I have a 3-button mouse and a numpad on my keyboard, but if you're using a laptop especially and don't have a numpad, this could be really useful, which remaps the number row to the numpad. This can also be really useful. This enable or emulate 3-button mouse remaps Alt plus left click to act like a middle mouse button. And so both those things are fairly important in Blender, the numpad and the 3-button mouse. So if you don't have one of those, you might want to go ahead and enable whatever you don't have. Next, I very briefly wanted to talk about the keybind menu, or the key map menu. So this is where all the keyboard shortcuts are located for the program. So if you ever want to remap something, this is the place to do it. You can also use this area to search for keybinds. So for example, if I search for search, you'll see that it comes up with F3, and for me it also comes up with spacebar, and that's because I actually added a keybind for spacebar for search. You don't really need to do that though. Just know that F3 is bound to search, and kind of keep that in mind for future reference. Again, this area is super useful since Blender has a large number of keybinds, so definitely make a note of the key map tab and settings and kind of how to get to it. And it might even be a good idea to kind of play around with this and get really familiar with it. And so the last tab I want to talk about is the System tab. And main reason I want to talk about this is because I've had issues in the past where Blender either doesn't see that I have a graphics card, or is trying to use the integrated graphics on my processor instead of my actual graphics card. So for example, it'll be like this. And if it's like this, it'll be super slow when you try to render. And so I personally recommend making sure that you're set up to actually use your graphics card if you have one. It'll definitely make rendering a lot faster once we get to that. And then if you have an NVIDIA card, I recommend using the CUDA option, as the other two don't really have that great of support for NVIDIA compared to CUDA. Once you get all the settings tweaked the way that you want, you can go ahead and close the menu. And then if you go to File, Defaults, and Save Startup File, and then click OK, you'll actually save all the settings that you just tweaked, so that next time you open up a new Blender project, all those settings will automatically be applied. So that's really useful. So that pretty much wraps up our look at user settings. In the next few videos, we'll start looking at how to manipulate objects, and I'll also start posting exercises to practice with. Uh, in closing, thanks for taking the time to watch the video, and I hope you like and subscribe.